Liam Carter was 35 and still waiting for his big break in a city that never quite embraced him. A chef by trade and a dreamer by nature, he lived in a cramped apartment above a jazz bar in the heart of New Orleans, where the walls were thin and the scent of bourbon drifted through the floorboards. Every day he chopped vegetables, prepped sauces, and seared meats in the back kitchens of second-rate restaurants, places that cared more about turning tables than serving good food. He had talent, a sharp palate, and a restless fire in him, but no title, no investors, and no pedigree. In the eyes of his parents, Henry and Darlene, that made him a disappointment. They had envisioned more for their oldest son, something stable, prestigious, profitable. Their pride was Marcus, Liam's younger brother, a 31-year-old tech entrepreneur with a perfect resume, a clean condo, and a bank account that made dinner checks irrelevant. Liam didn't envy Marcus. He just hated the constant comparisons. Whenever he walked into a family dinner, he felt like a misprinted copy of someone else's success story. His one source of comfort in New Orleans was Julia, a sharp and confident real estate agent who'd been with him for 3 years. She had an eye for the future and a taste for security. But she loved Liam's passion. Or at least, she used to. Lately, even Julia seemed to be pulling away, subtly pushing him to consider more realistic options. "You're too talented to waste your time like this," she said after one especially brutal shift. "You could run a kitchen if you just played the game." But Liam didn't want to play the game. He wanted to change it. He dreamed of opening his own place. Not flashy, not fancy, just honest. A restaurant built on flavor and grit, not branding decks and investors' whims. But in New Orleans, dreams like that died quietly. The city was beautiful but brutal. Rent kept rising. Kitchens stayed full of politics. Every week felt like one more uphill push towards something that always slid out of reach. And though Liam still cooked with all his heart, each shift ended with the same dull ache. He was stuck, and starting to lose the belief that he'd ever climb out. Thanksgiving in the Carter household was always polished on the outside and quietly brutal underneath. That year, Liam had agreed, against his better judgment, to bring Julia to his parents' home in Lakeview, one of New Orleans' wealthier neighborhoods. The house looked like it had come out of a magazine. Spotless kitchen, curated wine selection, a dining table dressed like a showroom. Darlene greeted them with a rehearsed smile, air-kissing Julia and offering Liam a quick nod that barely masked her disappointment. Marcus arrived minutes later, fresh from a business trip, wearing a blazer with his startup's logo on it. Dinner started with pleasant small talk, but the undercurrent was all status, success, and subtle jabs. Marcus spoke effortlessly about his company's growth, new funding rounds, and an upcoming product launch. Their father beamed, nodding with pride. When Liam tried to contribute, mentioning a new Cajun rub he'd been developing, Darling interrupted to ask Julia how the real estate market was doing. No one asked Liam about his work. No one had ever seen the inside of a kitchen he'd cooked in. As dinner progressed, Liam felt himself shrinking in his seat. His parents weren't overtly cruel. They didn't have to be. Their silence said enough. Every time Marcus opened his mouth, it was another reminder that Liam had failed to meet the family standard. The breaking point came after dessert, while Liam was helping clear plates. He passed by the kitchen and paused when he heard voices behind the half-shut door. It was his mother, speaking in that saccharine tone she used when she wanted to sound gentle but still cut deep. "Julia," she said, "you're a smart woman. Don't you ever wonder if you're settling? I mean, Marcus, he has a future. Liam's still chasing shadows." Julia didn't reply immediately. When she did, her voice was soft. "I worry sometimes," she said. "He's got so much heart, but I don't know where it's all going." That was all Liam needed to hear. He didn't walk in. He just stood there, frozen, every muscle tight with anger and hurt. Back at the table, he wore a smile like armor and acted as if nothing had happened, but something in him had cracked. That night, after driving Julia home in silence, he sat in his apartment staring at the ceiling. The city hummed below, as indifferent as ever. Liam had never felt so invisible, so discarded by the people who were supposed to believe in him. And in that still, bitter silence, a new resolve began to form. Something had to change. He had to leave. The silence between Liam and Julia stretched in the days after Thanksgiving like an unraveling thread. She stopped coming by after work, said she needed space, claimed she was just sorting things out. Liam tried not to push, but he could feel the shift in the air, like a door slowly closing. A week later, she finally said the words he feared. She and Marcus had been talking. "It just happened," she said, eyes avoiding his. "He understands the life I want, stability, a future." Liam didn't yell. He didn't beg. He simply nodded, numb. Julia left with a single box of her things, and Liam stood alone in the kitchen where he'd once cooked her gumbo by candlelight. He didn't sleep that night, or the one after, and when morning came, the city's music, usually his comfort, sounded like noise. The people, the bars, the food, the sweat of New Orleans, it all felt suffocating. 3 days later, Liam packed a single duffel bag, his kitchen knives and what was left of his savings, $1,800, 0 cents, and bought a one-way bus ticket to Denver. He had no job lined up, no friends waiting, only a vague memory of a food documentary praising the city's experimental dining scene. Denver wasn't a plan, it was an escape hatch. The bus ride was long and quiet, the windows streaked with southern rain that turned into snow as they crossed state lines. Liam stared out at endless highways and wondered what the hell he was doing, but something inside him refused to turn back. He arrived in Denver in the dead of winter. The air was thinner, sharper, his breath fogged with every step as he dragged his bag through unfamiliar streets. He found a room for rent in a drafty old house near the outskirts of the city, a basement with a squeaky bed and no heat, but it was something. His first week was a grind of rejection. He visited every restaurant he could find, knocking on back doors, handing over his resume, and offering to do anything. Cook, clean, prep, but no one bit. Too much experience, some said. Not enough, others countered. The cold was punishing, the city indifferent. But despite it all, Liam stayed. Because going back to New Orleans meant returning to failure, to silence, to being less than. And here, even if no one knew his name yet, at least the story was his to write. Liam's break came on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Gray sky, frozen breath, and another round of unanswered job inquiries. He was down to a few $100s, skipping meals to stretch his funds, when he saw a handwritten "Help Wanted" sign taped crookedly to the front window of a small cafe in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. Raymond's Diner wasn't much to look at. Chipped paint, flickering neon, and a tiny chalkboard menu. But Liam pushed the door open and asked to speak to the owner. Raymond himself, a gruff man in his 60s with a salt and pepper beard and a permanent scowl, looked him up and down. "Can you wash dishes without whining?" he asked. Liam nodded. "I can do anything," Raymond grunted. "Show up tomorrow at 5. Don't steal the silverware." And just like that, Liam had a job, barely above minimum wage, but a start. For 2 weeks, Liam scrubbed pans, mopped floors, and wiped down tables without complaint. He kept his head down, worked long hours, and occasionally got to prep food when someone called in sick. One afternoon, the line cook botched an order, and Liam, not thinking, stepped in. He whipped up a plate of seared trout with Creole butter and charred okra, a dish he had invented back in New Orleans. He slid it onto the counter just as a woman at table 6 was asking for something off menu. She took one bite, then another, and asked to speak to the chef. Raymond pointed at Liam with a thumb. "That's the guy." She approached the kitchen window and smiled. That was unexpectedly good. Her name was Natalie Reyes, a former food critic turned freelance writer who had moved to Denver after burning out on big-name restaurants and industry politics. They chatted briefly, her curiosity piqued by his accent, his eyes, and the fact that she hadn't tasted a dish with that kind of soul in months. She came back the next day, and the next. Every time she ordered whatever Liam happened to be experimenting with in the back. On the 4th visit, she pulled up a chair across from him during his break and asked him directly, "What's your story?" Liam hesitated, then told her the truth, about New Orleans, about Julia and Marcus, about the Thanksgiving dinner that broke him. Natalie didn't flinch. In fact, she laughed. Let me guess. Marcus Carter? Yeah, I dated him, briefly, before your mom told me I'd never be good enough for him. Liam blinked. You're kidding. She shook her head. I wish. That moment cracked something open. The two of them, two people rejected by the same family, both left behind for the shinier version of ambition, found a strange, instant camaraderie. They weren't just connecting over food. They were bonding over bruises. And for the first time since leaving New Orleans, Liam felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone anymore. It started with an idea, scribbled on a napkin. Natalie had been coming to Raymond's for weeks, sharing late-night conversations with Liam after the cafe closed. One night they stayed past midnight, drinking burnt coffee and tossing around wild ideas. What if we did our own thing? Natalie said, eyes lit with a kind of reckless hope. Something small, underground. Pop-ups, maybe. Let the food speak for itself. Liam hesitated. He was still scraping by, barely making rent, but the thought of cooking his own food again, on his terms, lit something inside him. They called it Hearthline. The name came from a phrase Liam used to describe the soul of a kitchen. The hearth is the heart. They pooled what little they had, Liam's last $200, 0 cents, Natalie's freelance paycheck, and rented time at a shared commercial kitchen. They printed cheap flyers, posted online, and hosted their first pop-up in a drafty warehouse space with folding tables and clip-on lights. The first night was a disaster. Only a dozen people showed up, most of them curious passers-by. The burners were slow, the food came out late, a reviewer from a local blog came and left without eating, but Natalie didn't let it break them. We're not after quick wins, she reminded him. We're building something real. They refined the menu, added seasonal touches, played up the storytelling. By the third pop-up, they had a line out the door. Diners came for Liam's smoky corn bisque and stayed for Natalie's handwritten menus that told the story of each dish. Word of mouth started to spread. Their mismatched team, one ex-dishwasher, one ex-critic, became a small curiosity in Denver's dining scene. Despite the growth, it wasn't easy. Money remained tight. The kitchen rentals were expensive. One night, a faulty fryer caused a small fire, setting them back a week. Another time, a food delivery never arrived, forcing them to improvise an entirely new menu on the fly. But through it all, Liam and Natalie moved in rhythm, learning each other's instincts like a dance. They slept little, worked constantly, and somehow never got tired of each other's presence. One afternoon, after cleaning up from a private dinner, Natalie looked across the room at Liam, sleeves rolled up, arms streaked with sauce, and said, "We need a space. A real one." They found a tiny corner storefront just off South Broadway. The rent was cheap because the building needed work. The paint peeled and the stove was barely operational, but it had potential. With help from Raymond and a few new friends they'd made in the scene, they scraped it together. The official opening of Hearthline wasn't glamorous. No grand opening party, no press release. Just a chalkboard menu, a warm dining room, and two people who refused to quit. The city didn't know it yet, but something new had begun to simmer on those worn countertops. And this time, Liam wasn't cooking for survival. He was cooking for something that might finally last. Hearthline opened its doors quietly but faced the noise of reality from day one. The first month was rough. Really rough. Liam and Natalie were in over their heads. The stove broke down mid-service on their third night. A surprise health inspection turned up minor violations that nearly shut them down. And for weeks, the dining room sat half-empty, despite glowing online reviews from a few loyal early customers. Some nights they made less than what it cost to stay open. Liam stayed late scrubbing grease from the walls, and Natalie worked the front of house like a one-woman show. Host, server, manager. Their hands were always raw, their backs aching, their bank account a stubborn, blinking zero. Still, they kept going. They weren't just building a restaurant, they were proving something. To their old lives, their families, themselves. Then came Kiera, a 22-year-old pastry chef who wandered into the restaurant one night asking for work. She'd been fired from 2 bakeries for being too experimental, but when Liam tried her smoked peach tart with rosemary cream, he hired her on the spot. Kiera brought fresh energy into Hearthline. She posted behind-the-scenes videos on social media, drew attention from the city's foodies, and created desserts that were as bold as they were addictive. One of her tarts went viral locally, and suddenly there were lines out the door. A small food blog ran a feature titled Hearthline, the heart of Denver's new food movement, and just like that, the little kitchen on South Broadway became a buzzword. The pressure only grew from there. Liam and Natalie juggled new customers, tricky suppliers, and the creeping fear of burning out. But somewhere in the blur of prep lists and pickup tickets, something deeper settled between them. One night, after a long double shift, they collapsed in the dining room with a half bottle of red wine and leftovers from the special. The lights were low, the air smelled of caramelized onions and thyme. Natalie reached over and brushed a strand of hair from Liam's forehead. "You know," she said softly, "I've never felt more alive. Or more insane." Liam laughed, exhausted and filled with something he hadn't felt in years: warmth. "I don't want to do this with anyone else," he said. She leaned in and kissed him. No hesitation, no performance, just the quiet collision of 2 people finally finding something real. They didn't rush into labels. Their partnership had been forged through long nights and shared scars. But after that kiss, everything changed. Natalie began leaving toothbrushes at his place. Liam started humming in the mornings again. They had found a rhythm, in business, in love, in life. And while the days were still hard, the dream no longer felt lonely. Together they were building more than a restaurant. They were building home, a place not just for diners, but for each other. Hearthline had come a long way from the napkin-sketched dream it started as. After months of word-of-mouth momentum, a surprise feature in the Denver Weekly put them on the map. They were invited to participate in the Mile High Taste Showcase, a city-wide food event spotlighting rising stars in the culinary world. It was a huge moment, not just for the business, but for Liam personally. Natalie, sensing what it could mean, suggested something bold. "Invite your family," she said, placing the printed event program in front of him. Liam looked at her like she'd lost her mind, but Natalie was calm. "Not for their approval, for your closure." After a few days of wrestling with it, he agreed. He sent a short, polite invitation to Henry and Darlene. He added Marcus and, almost as an afterthought, Julia. No expectations, just a line drawn in the sand. To his shock, they RSVP'd yes. The night of the event, Hearthline was buzzing. The kitchen ran smooth, the smells of rosemary lamb and fried oyster hush puppies dancing through the air. Liam stood beside Natalie, dressed in his cleanest chef coat, trying to keep his nerves at bay. And then he saw them. His parents, Marcus and Julia, walking in together, dressed for success but looking strangely out of place amid the more relaxed crowd. Darlene's smile was tight. Henry looked like he had swallowed a lemon. Marcus nodded stiffly. Julia smiled too, brightly. For a moment, Liam felt the old pressure creeping up. Years of judgment, comparison, dismissal. But Natalie placed a gentle hand on his back. "You've already won," she whispered. Later, as he stood on stage to introduce Hearthline to the crowd, Liam didn't talk about success. He talked about second chances, about being overlooked, about what it means to build something from scratch when no one believes in you. His words weren't just about food, they were about him. And when he looked down at his family, he didn't see superiority or approval, just people who didn't know him anymore and maybe never had. After the showcase ended and the crowd began to thin, Liam found himself face to face with his family. His mother stepped forward first, her voice low and uncertain. "You did well tonight, Liam." His father gave a small nod but kept his arms crossed, eyes darting around as if avoiding Liam's entirely. Marcus extended a hand, his usual confidence dimmed. "Congrats, man, really." But it felt hollow. Julia lingered behind them, quiet, her expression unreadable. When Marcus pulled Liam aside to talk, it wasn't small talk, it was a request. "My startup's tanking," he admitted. "If you've got any contacts—" Liam cut him off gently. "Marcus, I built this with nothing. You can too." There was no malice in his tone, just truth. Then Julia approached. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "I was wrong." Liam met her eyes, memories rushing in. But he wasn't angry. He wasn't heartbroken. He just nodded. "I forgive you. But that chapter's closed." As they turned to leave, Liam felt no triumph, no need to prove himself. The weight he'd carried for years was gone. Standing beside Natalie, her hand in his, he realized he didn't need their validation. He had his peace, and that was enough. A year later, Hearthline wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. What started as a two-person dream in a beat-up storefront had grown into a respected name in Denver's culinary world. The restaurant had expanded into the adjacent unit, doubling its space. They brought in new talent, line cooks, servers, sous chefs, all hungry, all overlooked by bigger kitchens. And Liam and Natalie made it a point to mentor each one, especially the misfits with fire in their eyes and scars on their resume. Kira was now head of pastry and running workshops for local teens. Their latest pop-up series, Roots and Reclaim, celebrated immigrant cooking traditions and had gotten attention from national food blogs. What made Hearthline different wasn't the presentation or plating. It was the soul. Every dish came with a story. Every guest left with more than just a full stomach. Liam and Natalie had also built a life outside the kitchen. They moved into a sunlit loft near Sloan's Lake, with exposed brick walls, big windows, and just enough space for two overworked dreamers to slow down now and then. Mornings were slow, Natalie humming while making coffee, Liam scribbling menu ideas on the back of grocery receipts. They still worked long hours, but it didn't feel like survival anymore. It felt like purpose. They celebrated failures as fiercely as wins, and when they disagreed, on recipes, on branding, on anything, they did it with respect and the shared understanding that everything they were building was bigger than ego. Liam no longer thought much about New Orleans. Sometimes he caught glimpses of it in the way a trumpet sounded on a Denver street, or the spice in a gumbo someone else tried to replicate. But it wasn't home anymore. He hadn't heard from Julia or Marcus in months. His parents sent a strained birthday text, nothing more. But those silences didn't sting the way they used to. The ache had been replaced with something quieter and stronger. Self-worth. Hearthline, Natalie, the life he'd built, they were proof he didn't need anyone's permission to matter. One quiet evening, as the sun set over the Rockies and the city lit up below their balcony, Natalie turned to him. "Did you ever think we'd make it this far?" Liam smiled, arm around her, the hum of distant traffic like a lullaby. "Not like this. Not this good." She kissed his cheek and whispered, "We're just getting started." And he believed her. He always had. Their story wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was theirs. Crafted with resilience, seasoned with loss, and served with love. And as long as they kept showing up, kept creating, kept believing, the next chapter was already cooking.